Gwen's footsteps crunched on the gravel path winding through the park, the crisp autumn air nipping at her cheeks. As she strolled, her gaze was drawn to a raven perched on a low-hanging branch, its obsidian feathers gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Normally, the birds would take flight at her approach, but this one remained motionless, its beady eyes fixed on her. Intrigued, Gwen slowed her pace, cautiously extending a hand towards the raven. To her surprise, it didn't flinch or flutter away. Instead, it cocked its head, regarding her with an almost human-like curiosity. Emboldened, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a handful of breadcrumbs, scattering them at the base of the tree. Over the next few days, Gwen made a habit of visiting the park, always carrying a small offering for her newfound feathered friend. The raven grew accustomed to her presence, hopping closer each time until it was bold enough to snatch the crumbs from her outstretched palm. Its sleek black plumage seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly iridescence, and its eyes held an intelligence that belied its avian form. Gwen found herself growing increasingly attached to the enigmatic creature, and on a whim, she decided to take it home with her. Carefully coaxing the raven into a makeshift carrier, she brought it back to her apartment, setting up a spacious cage and lining it with soft bedding. The raven seemed to take to its new surroundings with ease, and Gwen delighted in having a constant feathered companion. One crisp morning, as Gwen approached the cage, the raven let out a series of guttural caws that almost sounded like words. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Did you just speak?" she whispered, feeling foolish even as the words left her lips. "Speak," the raven repeated, its voice a raspy, yet unmistakable mimicry of her own. Gwen gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Over the next few weeks, she patiently taught the raven simple phrases and commands, marveling at its ability to not only mimic her words but seemingly comprehend their meaning. As their bond deepened, the raven's vocabulary expanded, and their conversations grew more complex. What had once been a one-sided exchange evolved into a true dialogue, with the raven offering its own thoughts and opinions in its gravelly, otherworldly voice. Gwen found herself conversing with the bird, as if it were a human companion, sharing her thoughts and feelings without reservation. "You will trip and crack your skull open on the sidewalk today," the raven warned one morning, its beady eyes boring into hers with an unsettling intensity. Gwen laughed it off, but sure enough, later that afternoon, she stumbled over an uneven slab of concrete, her head slamming against the pavement with a sickening crack. Blood poured from a gash in her scalp, and she lay there, dazed and disoriented, until a passerby called for help. The incident left her shaken to her core, and she found herself regarding the raven with a newfound sense of unease and dread. As the days passed, the raven's predictions grew more ominous and grotesque, foretelling gruesome mishaps and misfortunes that seemed to unfold with eerie accuracy. Gwen tried to brush them off, but a seed of doubt had taken root in her mind, festering like an open wound. "Your sister's car will be crushed like a tin can, her body mangled and broken," the raven croaked one day, its words sending a chill down her spine. Gwen pleaded with the universe, begging for the raven's dark prophecy to be wrong. But 3 days later, her phone rang with the dreaded news. Her sister had been T-boned at an intersection, her car crumpled like a twisted piece of metal, her limbs shattered and her face a bloody mess. Miraculously, she had survived, but the images of her injuries would haunt Gwen's nightmares for years to come. From that moment on, Gwen found herself trapped in a waking nightmare, the raven's dire predictions unfolding like a macabre play. Friends fell ill with rare and agonizing diseases, loved ones passed away in freak accidents or at the hands of brutal assailants, and each time, the raven had foreseen it all, its rasping voice a harbinger of doom. It would describe the grisly details with relish, painting vivid pictures of broken bones, gushing wounds, and lifeless bodies. "And you, Gwen," it said one fateful morning, its obsidian eyes boring into her soul like twin voids. You will die a slow, agonizing death, your flesh rotting from your bones as you beg for the sweet release of oblivion. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Gwen felt her world crumbling around her. She fled her apartment, desperate to escape the raven's ominous presence, but the bird took flight, swooping after her and alighting on her shoulder. Its weight was a tangible reminder of the darkness that had seeped into her life, and she shuddered beneath its piercing gaze. Gwen found herself drawn back to the park, where she had first encountered the raven, wandering the familiar paths as the bird perched on her shoulder, its obsidian feathers brushing against her cheek. "It's not too late to change your fate," the raven whispered, its voice a raspy caress against her ear. Gwen's heart raced with a glimmer of hope, but the raven's next words extinguished it like a candle in the wind. "But you won't." With those chilling words, the raven took flight, its obsidian wings carrying it higher and higher until it was a mere speck against the leaden sky. Gwen watched, transfixed, as it circled overhead, a harbinger of her impending demise. As she stood there, rooted to the spot, she felt the icy tendrils of fate closing in around her. The raven's predictions had always come true, and she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this one would be no different. In that moment, Gwen understood the true nature of the creature that had once been her friend. It was no mere bird, but a dark emissary of death itself, its very existence intertwined with the tapestry of human suffering. As the raven's shadow passed over her, Gwen felt a profound sense of resignation wash over her. She had glimpsed the veil between worlds, and now it was time to cross the threshold into the unknown. The raven's ominous cawing grew louder, echoing through the park like a harbinger of doom. Gwen's heart raced as she scanned her surroundings, searching for the source of her impending demise. That's when she noticed the figure lurking behind a nearby tree, a glint of metal catching the fading sunlight. Before she could react, the figure emerged, brandishing a wicked-looking knife. Gwen's scream caught in her throat as the assailant lunged forward, the blade plunging deep into her abdomen. She gasped in agony, her hands clutching at the wound as warm blood seeped through her fingers. The raven circled overhead, its caws growing frenzied as Gwen collapsed to the ground, her life essence spilling onto the gravel path. The assailant stood over her, their face obscured by a dark hood, the knife dripping with her blood. As her vision began to fade, Gwen's gaze locked onto the raven, its obsidian eyes seeming to bore into her very soul. In that moment, she understood the true nature of the creature. It was not a harbinger of death, but death itself, a malevolent force that had toyed with her, dangling the promise of fate before her eyes like a cruel puppet master. With her last ounce of strength, Gwen reached out towards the raven, her fingers grasping at the empty air as the world around her dissolved into darkness. The raven's caws faded into the distance, and Gwen felt herself slipping away, her life ebbing away in a crimson pool on the ground. As the light faded from her eyes, she caught one last glimpse of the raven, its wings outstretched as it soared into the twilight sky, a harbinger of death that had claimed yet another victim.